podcast. Tonight's podcast is 7 Ways Why the World is Stuck in Titleocracy Arrogance. The titleocracy definition is titleocracy is the illusion that titles equal truth, labels equal wisdom, and status equals substance. It's a hierarchy BS that looks real on the surface but collapses the moment you examine it. It's actually built on uh, it's actually built on egotistical arrogance. The highest this definition is tuned to your highest frequency savage ingenious voltage. It's clean, sharp, and liberation. The high frequency definition of titleocracy is hierarchy built on labels instead of awareness. A system where people mistake the title for intelligence, the resume for reality, and the identity costume for actual clarity. It's an unrealized hierarchy because people inside the titleocracy, lack the knowledge they're trapped. They defend the title as if it's the self. The ego fuses with the letters after the name, and suddenly the person is loyal to the role, never the veracity. Titleocracy survives by rewarding performance over perception, certainty over curiosity, and obedience over awareness. It elevates those who look authoritative, never those who actually see the world clearly and whatever they're doing with clarity. It's a hierarchy of unquestioned roles, never awakened the minds and the scenarios of your desired lifestyle. Why titleocracy is unrealized hierarchy. Titleocracy is the ego's favorite magic trick, a hierarchy built on names, letters, and labels instead of actual prowess, wisdom, insight, and clarity. It looks like authority, but it's really an identity costume worn by people who never questioned the script. See, that's what we never have done in a long time. I never either. We always said this person's this and this person's that, but we've never really questioned anything. And that's the thing. When you question the script that I inherited, titleocracy, inherited in titleocracy, the title outranks the truth. The resume outranks the reality, and the persona outranks the person. It's a hierarchy that survives only because nobody ever stops to ask who they are without the badge. You see, you got to ask the questions, and you got somebody walking around. You see this a lot. I saw this a lot when I was a union electrician. People walk around, but you got to ask, what are they without the title? And how do they use the title to manipulate people and coerce people? Titleocracy is unrealized because the people inside titleocracy don't realize they're trapped in their egotistical arrogance. Because that's all titleocracy is egotistical arrogance, know-it-all ignorance, and having this thing in their head that they're better than somebody else. Here's the thing. Everybody in the world understands something you don't. They defend their titleocracy like armor, mistaken memorized expertise for living intelligence. They cling to identity because without it, they'd have to face the terrifying possibility that awareness is never achievement is it's the authentic source. And the authentic source of clarity is you seeing your path clearly. That's why hierarchy persists. The ego needs the title to feel tall, even if the awareness underneath is still crawling. The savage veracity is titleocracy is never hierarchy of wisdom, it's a hierarchy of unquestioned roles. It rewards those who perform certainty, never those who embody clarity. It elevates the loudest identity, never the deepest insight. And the moment you see through it, the whole structure collapses. And that's the way, if you look at the world today and a lot of the business models out there, if you look at them with authenticity and straightforward, you'll see they collapse under your prowess. They collapse like a sandcastle pretending to be a fortress. The world is stuck in titleocracy because it confuses labels with wisdom, credentials with clarity, and status with substance. Titleocracy is the ego's favorite illusion, a hierarchy built on names, roles, letters after a name rather than actual perception or capability. These key points cut into why this fog bank of titleocracy persists and why it keeps humanity operating from outdated identities and outdated scripts. And how do you see that in the world today, where people think they're all this, but they operate outside and they stay stuck in the titleocracy and the arrogance of it? The world is stuck in titleocracy arrogance because it confuses the costume of titleocracy for consciousness, and that confusion becomes a global fog bank that keeps humanity operating from outdated identities instead of actual awareness. See, clarity and awareness brings you to the here and now. The highest frequency, savage, ingenious key points cut straight into why this trap holds so much power. And that's the thing. It don't hold prowess, it holds power. And power holds you. Prowess liberates you. Why the world is stuck in titleocracy arrogance. Titleocracy arrogance makes people worship the label instead of their adventurous awareness that lives inside them. When a title becomes the source of someone's worth, they stop evolving and start defending. How many times have you defended everything you know almost to the death? I know I have. And every time I defend something that strongly, it turns out to be there's something comes in and awakens me. As soon as you stop evolving and start defending, the ego fuses with the badge, CEO, PhD, expert, authority, and suddenly the person is no longer responding to reality or nowality, but protecting the identity that props them up. This creates a hierarchy built on performance, never innovative perception and prowess, where the loudest title outranks the clearest insight. The arrogance is never personal, it's structural. A system that teaches people to trust the label more than the human wearing it. When you trust your abilities, you rise out of all this. Titleocracy rewards certainty over clarity. So people cling to outdated knowledge. Once someone's identity is built on I know, they become terrified of I might be wrong. See, that's the biggest thing about titleocracy. The biggest fear is I might be wrong. I've never been wrong. I've just had some hellacious awakenings. See, that's the thing. There is no right or wrong. There's just awakenings and awakenings. The fear produces the arrogance, a defensive certainty that blocks fresh information as fresh perception and fresh scenarios rise from situation as the world gets stuck because people in charge are loyal to their past conclusions, never the present moment mastery. Titleocracy turns intelligence into a museum exhibit, polished credentials, and completely disconnected from living awareness. Titleocracy trains society to obey hierarchy and social obedience instead of sensing the veracity and the vitality of your own wisdom, insight, and clarity. People defer to titles automatically, doctor, professor, leader, expert, even when the title holder is operating from yesterday's mind binds. This obedience creates a collective fog bank where authority is mistaken for accuracy and hierarchy is mistaken for wisdom. The arrogance spreads because the system teaches everyone to look up the ladder instead of inward and onward to their perceptions, innovation, imagination, and all their free-flowing energy they encompass. A world that trusts titles over awareness becomes predictable, controllable, and stuck in the inherited illusions. Where do you see that today? I see that all over. What makes titleocracy unrealized hierarchy? Titleocracy pretends to be a hierarchy of wisdom, but is actually a hierarchy of inner identity armor. It's about having it's being in your own thinking, knowing prison. Titleocracy rewards the loudest title, never the deepest insight. Titleocracy keeps people stuck in outdated identities because the ego fears losing the badge more than losing the veracity and the authenticity. Titleocracy is a fog bank where the world confuses knowing with seeing, status with substance, and expertise with awareness. Why titleocracy traps the world in ego fog. Titleocracy is a system where the titles outrank veracity and authenticity, and status outranks awareness. It produces people who are credential rich, and that's like having a degree rich, but perception poor. Titles become identity armor, so people defend the label instead of expanding their awareness. When someone's worth is tied to a title, doctor, CEO, professor, expert, the ego fuses it with the role. This creates a fog bank because the person becomes more invested in protecting the identity than in seeing the nowality and the veracity of the here and now. They cling to the title even when the title stops reflecting competence or clarity. A title becomes a shield that blocks evolution. Where do you see that in your life? I see that in my life. You know, the more I liberate myself from the egotistical world, the social obedience, the more I liberate and see the world through energy. Titles create artificial hierarchies that reward obedience, never intelligence. Titleocracy trains people to defer to authority. Where do you see that in your life? I see that in my life a lot. You know, that's the thing. Something that used to happen a lot when I was an electrician is they'd promote somebody and they give him the title Holy cow, did he become an egotistical, arrogant knucklehead? And that's the thing. People become egotistical knuckleheads when they get the titles. So instead of trusting your own perception, the world becomes a pyramid of experts who must be obeyed, non experts who must stay silent, leaders who must be followed, followers who must never question the leaders. That's the trouble. The world don't question our leadership anymore. That happened big time in the Union. This is a perfect fog bank, a society where people outsource their thinking to whoever has the biggest label. Where do you see that today? It's never intelligence, it's hierarchy dressed as wisdom. Titles freeze people in outdated identities, making them predictable and easy to control. Once a title becomes someone's identity, they stop evolving and listening. They defend their field, their methods, and their worldviews, even when the world has changed. And you can witness that in the world right now, big time. This creates a global fog bank because entire systems are run by people who are loyal to their role, never their normality and natural abilities. Titleocracy keeps humanity stuck in yesterday's mindset while pretending it's progress. Why people allow titleocracy to intimidate them. I have. But it's easier to intimidate titleocracy than be intimidated because they're afraid people have egotistical titleocracy. They're afraid somebody's going to question their abilities and they're never going to live up to it. People allow titleocracy to intimidate them because they've been conditioned to believe that labels outrank their wisdom, insight, and clarity, and that's the biggest lie in the world. The highest frequency and savvy to cut straight into the ego bows because the ego bows to titles, even when the awareness behind them is paper thin. Why people let titleocracy intimidate them, they mistake the appearance of authority for actual awareness and ability. Most people who were trained from childhood to treat titles, doctor, CEO, professor, experts as automatic proof of intelligence. The ego collapses under the illusion that the person with the title must know more than anybody. It's something I discovered when I was foreman, general foreman. The less I know, the more I listen and to the guys doing the work, the better I did. I actually got that lesson in life. When their awareness is outdated or absent, this creates intimidation because people assume the title holder sees more when in reality they often just memorize more. And see, that's the thing. We memorize stuff. Actually, in school, we learned to memorize stuff rather than embed it. And I'm still bad at that, but I'm more open to listening to the event that's going on right here and move forward. They fear being wrong more than the desire to being real. That's the thing. They're more worried about being wrong and more than the desire of being real. Titleocracy weaponizes certainty and egotistical arrogance. People defer to titles because they don't want to risk looking uninformed, unqualified, or out of place. The intimidation isn't about the title holder's power, it's about the listener's fear of exposing their own uncertainty. The savage truth about titleocracy thrives on people who confuse confidence with consciousness. They outsource their perceptions to avoid responsibility for their own clarity. It feels safer to trust the expert than to trust your own abilities, awareness, and clarity. People let titles intimidate them because it gives them permission to avoid thinking sensing, or questioning for themselves. This is a fog bank this is a fog bank of obedience masquerading as humility. Why? When it's really just the ego avoiding the discomfort of sovereignty. Why titleocracy shuts off listening to others, people's ideas, and people's skills. Why titleocracy shuts off listening to other people's ideas and witnessing other people's skills. Titleocracy shuts off listening because it turns the ego into a gatekeeper, never a receiver. Warrior Wise key points cut straight into why people with titles stop hearing and listening to listening to ideas, truth, and human skills is why titleocracy shuts off. The listening is the title becomes a shield that blocks perception, never a tool that expands it. When someone's identity fuses with their title, they stop listening because every fresh idea feels like a threat to the role they're never defending. And that's what's going on today. That's why we stay inside the business and education, because everything outside of that feels like a threat. A warrior sees this instantly. The title holder isn't rejecting the idea, they're protecting the persona. Once the ego believes I am the authority and can no longer tolerate anything, that might reveal a blind spot. Listening dies because awareness would expose the cracks the titleocracy is hiding. Titleocracy trains people to value dominance over dialogue. In a title-based hierarchy, the person with the title assumes they must be the smartest voice in the room because they got promoted to it. Mostly, I'm going to be honest with you, if you're getting promoted to that, that's because you're the best ass kisser. Let's just get it out there. So instead of listening, they perform certainty. Instead of curiosity, they protect control. Instead of collaboration, they default to command. This is a warrior-wise clarity. You can never hear others when your ego is busy proving itself. Man, I've witnessed that one inside myself. Titles create a false sense of superiority that blinds people to their human skills and lived wisdom. Title holders often dismiss ideas from those beneath them because the hierarchy tells them they already know more. This arrogance shuts off listening to emotional wisdom, intuitive insight, and the real world's fresh experiences. These very skills that make teams, relationships, and communities thrive. A warrior sees the trap. The higher the title, the smaller the awareness becomes when the ego is in charge. Why people allow titles to steal their character and their backbone. People allow titles to steal their character and backbone because titleocracy hijacks the ego, rewires the self-worth, and convinces people that external labels outrank their internal veracity. The highest frequency warrior-wise key points cut straight into the mechanics of that collapse. Why people allow titles to steal their character and backbone is titles become a substitute for inner authority. When someone believes a title holder automatically knows more, they hand over their perception without even noticing. The moment external authority outranks internal awareness, character collapses, backbone dissolves, because the person stops trusting their own eyes, instincts, and fresh wisdom. A warrior sees the trap the moment you outsource your veracity. You outsource your prowess, you give away your wisdom. People fear social rejection more than self-betrayal. People fear social rejection more than self-betrayal. I don't now, but I did. Titleocracy weaponizes belonging. People obey titles because they never want to look unqualified, uninformed, or outplaced. They trade their backbone for acceptance, their character for approval, and their clarity for conformity. This is the warrior wise punchline. Most people never lose their backbone. They surrender their backbone to avoid standing alone. Titles trigger the ego's survival reflex, making people shrink instead of stand. When a title enters the room, when somebody with a title enters the room, many people unconsciously revert to childhood, conditioning, respect, and authority. Never challenge the expert. Don't question the leader. This survival script overrides sovereignty. People shrink and silence themselves and defer, never because the title holder is more powerful, but because their own ego fears being wrong, exposed, or seen. Warrior clarity A title can never steal your backbone. Only your fear can. Why people don't lose their backbone, they surrender their backbone to avoid standing alone. That was an eye-opener for me. People don't lose their backbone, they hand it over because the ego fears isolation more than it fears self-betrayal. The highest warrior acumen is cut straight into why standing alone feels more dangerous than surrendering your sovereignty. Why people surrender their backbone to avoid standing alone. They confuse belonging with safety, so they trade truth for acceptance. Most people were conditioned to believe that fitting in keeps them safe. When a group leader or title holder signals a direction, they follow, never because they agree, but because standing apart feels like exile. The warrior sees the trap the moment you choose belonging over integrity. Your backbone bends to survive the room instead of honoring your own clarity and canniness. They fear the discomfort of visibility more than the pain of self-abandonment. Standing alone exposes you. It forces you to be seen without the shield of consensus. For many, that exposure feels unbearable, so they surrender their stance to avoid the spotlight. This is the ego survival script. Blend into stay quiet, don't disrupt the hierarchy. Warrior acumen reveals the veracity and the authenticity. Silencing yourself to stay comfortable is the fastest way to lose yourself in self-pity. They mistake external authority for internal truth, so they defer instead of discern. When someone with a title, role, or status speaks, people often collapse their own perceptions. They assume the title holder must know better, so they override their instincts to avoid conflict. This is how the backbone dissolves, never through force, but through self-doubt. Warrior wisdom cuts through it. Your perceptions is your authority. Surrendering is the real danger. Why titleocracy, know-it-all ignorance, egotistical arrogance steals intuition and innovation. Titleocracy steals intuition and innovation because it replaces living intelligence with performative certainty. The warrior nous cuts straight into the know-it-all ignorance and egotistical arrogance and shuts down the very capacities that create breakthroughs. Why titleocracy and know-it-all ignorance steals intuition and innovation. Know-it-all ignorance or know-it-all arrogance blocks intuition by drowning out the inner perception. Intuition requires openness, receptivity, and the ability to sense what isn't yet obvious. Titleocracy destroys that because the ego behind the title must always appear certain, correct, and superior. When someone is busy performing, I already know. They can't feel the subtle signals that guide real insight. They can never feel the subtle signals that guide real insight. Warrior now sees the truth. Intuition dies the moment the ego refuses to listen inward. Title-driven ego shuts down innovation by rejecting anything that threatens the identity. Innovation requires questioning, experimenting, and being willing to be wrong, or be willing to be investigative. Titleocracy is built on the illusion that the title holder must forever be wrong. So fresh ideas get dismissed, fresh perspectives get ignored, and creative risks get suffocated because they threaten the ego status. This is the warrior-wise clarity. Innovation can never survive in the mind that fears being exposed. Titleocracy replaces curiosity with defensive certainty, killing the spark of discovery. Curiosity is the engine of innovation. Titleocracy trains people to defend what they know instead of exploring what they never knew. The know-it-all mindset becomes a cage, never new questions, new angles, never new scenarios. Warrior nous exposes the core theft. Arrogance steals the future by clinging to the past. Why titleocracy, know-it-all ignorance, egotistical arrogance destroys communication, collaboration, connection, and contours. Titleocracy's know-it-all ignorance and egotistical arrogance destroys communication, collaboration, connection, and contours because the ego behind the title becomes louder than awareness behind the human. The warrior nous cuts straight into how everything collapses. How titleocracy destroys communication, collaboration, connection, and contours. The title holder stops listening, so the communication becomes a one-way broadcast. When someone believes their title makes them the smartest voice in the room, they stop receiving and start performing. Communication collapses because the ego treats every conversation as a stage, never a shared space. This creates distortion. People speak to protect their status, never to understand. Warrior nous witnesses the core fracture. You can never communicate when the ego is too busy hearing itself. Mine does that. Collaboration dies because arrogance blocks the flow of ideas. Know-it-all ignorance shuts down the very condition collaboration needs. Curiosity, humility, and openness open the way. Titleocracy and title holders reject input that doesn't match their identity. So teams stop offering insight and start offering silence. Innovation evaporates because no one risks contributions. To a mind that's already decided, warrior clarity exposes the cost. Arrogance turns teamwork into compliance. Connection and relational contours collapse because the title replaces the person. When the title becomes the identity, the human disappears. People can never connect with a badge, a role, or a persona. They connect with presence. Titleocracy strips away presence and replaces it with performance. The relational contours flatten because title holders interact from superiority, never humanity. Warrior Nous names the veracity. Connection dies the moment hierarchy becomes more important than honesty and integrity. So, what titleocracy does, it locks and blocks you in yesterday. And it locks you in your know it all, and you have to be right. And you really never want to listen to anybody that's outside of who you are. And I want to thank you and enjoy your weekend. This is Robert Wilson with Cowboy Wisdom Podcast. Good night.